You meet a young person, maybe one of your daughter's friends, and he or she says, Mr. Gregory, I want to work in publishing. I want to follow in your footsteps. What advice would you give them then?
Tina Brown and Jan Wenner, they were arbiters of the culture. That's what an editor-in-chief did. In fact, Jan Wenner told me once, I used to get to decide every 2 weeks who the coolest person in America was and put them on the cover of Rolling Stone. The power that these relatively few group of people had, that's gone now. So the other part of that is just the ability to tell stories that are believable or relatable or inspiring. When Walter Cronkite said live, I'm getting goosebumps, took his glasses off and, he had to take a breath. John F. Kennedy died 25 minutes ago in Parkland Hospital. You knew that Kennedy was dead. Like, you could trust him. If you're really good at that, I think you can find a way to succeed by doing that as a profession.
Welcome to Make the Donuts. I'm your host, Eric Sabiston. I'm a best-selling author, a dual-rated airline pilot, and a career counselor. I've helped over 8,000 people make the jump to the airlines. Now, I'm interviewing successful people from a variety of professions around the world. It's time to learn their secrets for success. Make the Donuts starts now. Okay, this is Rob Gregory. If you haven't heard of his name, you've heard about the things he's done. I mean, he was a publisher at Rolling Stones, worked over at Newsweek as the president of that and the Daily Beast. He's done a million things. He's like a media icon. He's not really just a publisher. He's, in my opinion, a guy who is great at putting people together, okay? And you're going to learn a lot about his journey and how he was successful and what he considers success is. So without further ado, I want to bring my friend Rob on. Rob Gregory, it's great to have you on the show, man. Thanks for coming.
Eric, it is an honor to be on the show, and it's great to see you again. And I don't fit the description of any of those words you used at all, especially icon. I'm probably more of a survivor of the media disruption than I am anything like an icon.
You started out in the mid-'80s at a time when media was completely transforming. And, our mutual friend Brian was working at MTV and music videos. And I mean, what did that look like when you went to college? You went to Boston, right? So what did that look like to you? Did it seem like the whole world was just upending in that time period?
I actually got into print publishing by accident. I wanted to work for an ad agency. I had a uncle who was from the Mad Men era and with the martini lunches and the iconic print campaigns and the great TV commercials. And I always admired him, and I wanted to work at an ad agency and be a creative. And in the early 80s, when I got out of college, the economy wasn't great and none of them were hiring. So I got a job at a small tech publisher. And then that led to Scientific American and Condé Nast and Rolling Stone and all that stuff. And I feel like this is a jump ahead for a second, and then we can backtrack. I'm in the third chapter of my career right now, and the first third was print publishing. The middle third was influencer and creator marketing and digital. And then the third is the company I'm running now and what I'm doing now, which I'm happy to talk more about. But that first third of magazine print publishing, I had just hit my stride really when the internet knocked the print magazine business on its butt, and the rest is history. And I did not see that coming, and neither did Time Inc. or Condé Nast or Hearst or any of the big publishers. None of the incumbents saw it coming.
So to backtrack though, you started at BU. I know you worked in advertising, but something happened right after that. Did you work for American Express in like a leisure type role? Tell me about that.
Yeah, I did. I joined the lifestyle group at American Express Publishing, which was at the time American Express owned a group of magazines, Travel and Leisure, Food and Wine, Departures, really, really great high-end stuff. And the magazines were all about the lifestyle that American Express card members, card holders would, want to live and would do, traveling and dining and, all that good stuff. So they brought me in to spin off the Travel and Leisure brand and start a new magazine called Travel and Leisure Golf. We shortened it to T&L Golf. And at the time, golf was booming. The Tiger Woods effect was in full force, and a whole new generation was discovering the sport. And it began to connect more and more to the lifestyle aspects of the sport. So golf wasn't just about hitting the ball. It was about traveling to Hawaii and wearing cool clothes and dining at great restaurants and, all the life. So we launched T&L Golf really at the height of that part of the golf boom. It boomed again after the pandemic, but that's another story.
I don't know. I guess you seem like a very down-to-earth person. So to work in that space, was it a challenge for you at all? Because, I mean, the rest of your resume is very diverse.
Because I've worked for these different media brands in digital or in print and then digital and now in experiential, and we'll get to that in a minute, I guess. I feel like one of the benefits has been I've gotten to go to some really cool things. And when you're given a new assignment as a media publisher and the steward of the brand, immersion in whatever the publication or the website or the platform is about, obviously. So, and you got to go from 0 to 100 miles really quickly. So a couple of months after I started, next thing I knew, I was at the Masters inside the ropes, chatting with Tiger, who had a big deal with American Express Publishing at the time, and got to go, see Butler Cabin and all the, the ceremonial tee shot with Arnie and, Jack Nicklaus and all those guys. And it's kind of you have to learn an industry very, very quickly. It's probably a little similar to private equity now. When a private equity firm buys a company in a particular vertical, you got to learn everything there is about it as fast as you can. So that was a really fun part of being a magazine publisher. Probably the best part.
It's a lot like being in the military. When I got dropped into a dust-off unit, I had no idea about medevac, flying at all. You just had to become an expert at it immediately. So you really just kind of became a chameleon to whatever the mission was.
Yeah, pretty much. And for me in the print, that was some seemingly unconnected verticals. With I worked at Scientific American, so it was technology and science. T&L Golf, it was golf and lifestyle. At Rolling Stone, it was music and pop culture and rock and roll. And so that, all those different things, you learn them very quickly. You leverage, hopefully you're with a media brand that has some clout and some built-in authority and access. So it's not like you're starting, at square one and just going to the library and reading up. You're welcomed into this world like the Masters or with Rolling Stone, it was pretty quick ramp up. And then and then the common denominators or the through lines are the same, right? You have to know how to position an audience. You have to speak to editorial quality. You have to bring advertisers a solution to their pain points and not just sell them ad pages. You have to know how to hire people and train them and motivate them. You have to compete. That when we launched T&L Golf, the golf category was Golf Magazine and Golf Digest and Golf Week. And, there were a bunch of them. Same with the music space. There was Blender and there was Spin and there were, all these different things. So those generic skills, you take them from property to property. And then hopefully there's some build. Each time you get a little bit better and maybe you're running a bigger business or a larger team. You're learning from the mistakes that you made, the year before or a few years before, and you try not to make them again.
Well, then you drop right into something that everyone's going to know, and it's an opportunity. It's an experience that kind of transcends what you might think it is, and that's Rolling Stone. Rolling Stone, currently, very popular still, but it's not just about music, it's about politics. So now you're diving into a world where multiple different interests are kind of mixing together, these different disciplines. What was that like to go from, an affluent type, high-end leisure type, mindset to dealing with leaders on the world stage and musicians and all those kinds of personalities?
I was at Rolling Stone at a tumultuous time, and you probably, anybody who's followed it was founded in 1967. So Rolling Stone is a kind of creation of extraordinary and tumultuous times, right? It was founded in the 60s during the Vietnam War. And I was there during a period where there was a lot of major disruptive things happening. 9/11.
Of course.
After which nobody knew the tone they should take as an advertiser, if they even should advertise, or how could you sell things, in an earnest way to anybody in this climate. I was there when Napster came out.
Oh, yeah,
And
right.
digital music and MP3 players. And all of a sudden, music was digitized, and an entire record industry, which was a big part of our business. We had ads from the record labels in the magazine, started to dry up. People started pirate, and then the iPod came. In fact, I remember Steve Jobs' team said, because I was publisher of Rolling Stone, only because I had the title, it wasn't because of anything I did. They sent me a prototype of the first iPod before anybody else had one.
Whoa, dude. What did you think about that thing when you saw it? You had to be like, this is going to change everything.
And it did. And then, I would say the third, I don't want to say headwind, because these are all challenges that, there's a reason they call it work, right? It's hard. It's hard to run a business, and it's hard to lead a team. But the third thing that really kicked in when I was at Rolling Stone was just the internet generally. The idea that you would have to wait 2 or 3 weeks for a review of the new U2 album. We were talking about U2 before, whereas you could get it instantly on the internet. You could get, thousands of opinions on social media, all these new platforms, Twitter and Reddit and, Facebook and then Instagram and all that stuff. That was beginning to transform the entire media industry, eventually linear TV. But the industry that took the first hit was the print magazine business, for sure.
So did you see that when you saw the internet and you saw what was happening? You're holding an iPod in your hand. Did the light bulb go off and you're like, this is the next thing?
Not like I wish it had. And you wrote a great book. If I ever write a book, one of the topics I could write would be this phenomenon of, it's a little bit like the frog in the water that's slowly being heated up, and eventually it's boiling, and by the time the frog realizes it, it's too late. Nobody, including me, who had reached a certain level in the print magazine world at that time, either saw the power of the internet and its ability to disrupt, or saw it and was willing to believe it, was willing to admit it. I've been lucky enough to work for some people who really are icons, like Tina Brown at the Daily Beast, and Jan Wenner, the founder of Rolling Stone and Us Weekly and Men's Journal. He would admit this. He said early on, he said, this internet thing, it's going to take at least a full generation, meaning, 20 years, give or take, to really have an effect on our business. And he was dead wrong. And so was Condé Nast, so was Hearst, so was Time Inc. We were all wrong about how fast it was going to come.
Wow, that's incredible. And the way people consume content now is completely changed. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe now, as an advertiser or as a company trying to get their message across, you think to yourself, okay, dwell time, screen time on an app, on a social media app, it's no longer an hour at the Super Bowl. I've got millions of people on here every day. That's millions of hours a day of potential one-on-one conversations they could be having with potential customers.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think another change, just speaking of Tina Brown and Jan Wenner and people like that, Gerard Peel, who was running Scientific American, which was my first real job. They were arbiters of the culture. That's what an editor-in-chief did. They assigned stories. They looked at thousands of manuscripts. They made decisions about who to put on the cover or what to put on the cover. That role of arbiting the culture, in fact, Jan Wenner told me once, in a sort of rueful moment, he said, at this point, our business was really being affected by all of this. He said, I used to get to decide every 2 weeks, I got to decide who the coolest person in America was and put he or she or they on the cover of Rolling Stone. That's how powerful. Anna Wintour at Vogue, she would decide who goes on the cover of Vogue. She would decide to put the first black model on the cover of Vogue. Or, the power that these relatively few group of people had, that's gone now. There's nothing really in society. Maybe influencers, a small handful of, I don't know, Kardashian types have the power to influence people at that scale. But even that now, there are 50 million influencers on the planet. If you believe the influencer and creator, economy business people.
What a shift. What a paradigm shift. I mean, that's incredible. So when you look at stuff now, because you're older, wiser, and you say, okay, well, I've seen a lot of things and I've seen a lot of changes. What when you're looking at a new venture or an opportunity, what are you looking for? When you say, okay, this is going to be different, this is special, unique, what are you looking for?
Some people might say I can't hold down a job, but I've been lucky enough to work at a lot of different cool places and to, move around a bit, and, always been working the whole time. When I think about either a new, taking a job before I had my own company, which I do now, or taking on a client for my advisory business, or investing in a business, I think about a couple of things, and not necessarily all of these things at each opportunity. One is obviously if you're lucky enough to join a thing that's bigger than yourself, like a Rolling Stone or even the Daily Beast and the legendary Tina Brown. If you're lucky to join an organization that has fame and iconic status and clout and influence, that's fantastic. And then you can mold that clay a lot of different ways. And there's, another, I think a second thing I think about is the, are you catching the wave while it's still rising? Not at the very beginning. That would be Mark Zuckerberg and Larry Page. And, those guys caught it before there was a wave. Bill Gates, they created the wave. And then if you catch the wave where it's just start cresting and it's starting to crash and go down, that's not great either. But if you're catching it when it's beginning to really swell and build, that was my experience with Husei in the middle chapter of my multiple chapters of my crazy career. It was the influence. People call it the creator economy now, but it was we called it influencer marketing, or the influencer boom. And so if you're lucky enough to see that coming, and the big one obviously now is AI, and everybody's thinking about AI and everybody's obsessing about it. And I was at a conference this week, and you hear lines like the AI is not going to take your job, but the person who uses AI might take your job. You got to deal with it. And anyway, that to me, and I'm getting too old for this stuff, but for young people now, the opportunity to catch a wave like that. I mean, the last wave I seen, or the biggest wave I've seen in my lifetime was the 90s, when the broadband internet started to become, AOL and You've Got Mail and all that stuff. And it's happening again now in a major way. So I look for, I look for that. And then I guess the final thing I'd say when I look for a new venture, new opportunity is, and this sounds super cliched and trite, but it's, am I going to have am I going to be surrounded by a culture of good people who, I had a boss once who said that, the definition of culture is how you feel on Sunday night.
Wow, that's great.
Right? Like if you're starting to stress out and get depressed on Sunday night because you're not wild about going to the office Monday morning, the shit's going to hit the fan because of whatever, or your boss wasn't having that remark always stayed with me, is that, and culture, there's lots of one-liners about culture, right? Culture eats strategy for breakfast, and everything else. Yeah, I'd say that's the third thing is being in an organization, and that's my strengths. And I think one of the reasons why, if I were starting again now, I would not go into media or publishing, is because it has become so quantitative. It's math now. It's programmatic advertising. It's data. It's, performance marketing. It's lower funnel, high speed optimization of ads that perform and ads that don't, and platforms that perform and platforms that don't. And I'm not a math person. I'm not sure I would thrive in it. But I like working with great people.
That's what it's all about. I think you had a post recently that I enjoyed reading on LinkedIn about, I think it was about SNL, and how SNL was really a reflection of its generation, which in a way I kind of would think that Rolling Stone is the same thing. I think Rolling Stone is a reflection of its generation. It's a mirror that just exists. So is this current greater economy, is that a reflection of this new generation where it's boiled down to things that maybe we wouldn't identify with when we were young as much?
I'm very respectful of young people. I have a 26-year-old daughter, and she and her friends are amazing. They're amazing human beings. And they're more enlightened and they're more citizens of the world than
more intelligent,
I was.
my goodness.
They're more sophisticated, they're more intelligent, they're obviously digital natives.
More open-minded to different things, more exposed to different things than we were too.
Yeah, they are. But to go back to your question is like SNL and like other institutions like, Rolling Stone, is the creator economy boom a mirror or reflection back of our society and the world as it exists today and the human condition and all that stuff? And I'd say in some ways it is. There have always been people who are self-centered and narcissistic and have egos and want to, boast and display themselves for others to see and to be peacocks that, flash their feathers. And so this massive boom in the influencer, space and the creator economy, is that a reflection of a somewhat shallower culture, maybe, that we live in now? I'm sounding like the old fart now, and I try not
get
to
off my lawn, will you?
Get off my lawn, you kids. But I think in that way it is, and then I would also say, it's such a good question. I would also say it's a reflection of the shorter attention spans now.
Wow, that's profound. It really is. That's probably the crux of it all. And I think that, if you can get a hold of that, that's the zeitgeist. If you can figure out how that works and how it can work for you, then you can be successful. I would venture to say that I bet the best influencers are the ones who are not trying to be influencers.
Yes.
So how do you find somebody authentic like that?
Yeah. Yeah, look, authenticity has become a cliche in that business, and it's overused, but it's a legit, it's legit table stakes for being successful as an influencer. And again, I'm going to sound like the get off your lawn guy now, but I was at a conference in DC this week, and I've heard various versions of this statistic before. But if you ask very young people now, like tweens and teenagers, what do they want to be? Do they want to be in the armed forces? Do they want to be a cop? Do they want to be a fireman? Do they want to be a doctor? Do they want to be a lawyer? The number one answer, do you know what it is?
Influencer?
Influencer.
Really?
Yes.
Wow, what a change.
Yeah. And I that's worrisome.
Yeah,
and I don't know. I think people say that because the bar is set so low now, and what you don't here's one of the many dirty little secrets in the creator economy and the influencer world is that if you have success in that world, even moderate success, enough followers so that you can monetize it, and you can get a rev share on YouTube or on Instagram or on TikTok. Really, those are the big free. You have to feed the beast. It's like a roaring, starving beast with its mouth open. And by that, I mean, you have to create content.
Oh, yeah.
You have to make new videos and new, selfies and new, if you're a comedy, one of my clients is the New York Comedy Festival. We work with comedy creators all the time. You got to do new crowd work. You got to do new jokes. You got to do new observations. You got to do new improv. It's a beast you have to feed. And so most people by far who aspire to make a living being an influencer, they can't maintain that pace of being such a slave to it that you have to create so much content and keep refreshing it, keep posting it and keep posting it. And there's a lot of people get burned out, people get depressed, people lose interest, people get, they cross the line sometimes and they do stuff that's inappropriate. And so, yeah.
Yeah, it seems like an exhausting endeavor.
Yes.
And just trying to be in the business and figure out what's coming next. How do you stay ahead of that?
Hey, everybody. I want to take a quick second to thank my friends at Phantom Products for believing in Make the Donuts, sponsoring this first season. They're powering us. And on top of that, they've powered some amazing lighting applications. Since 1943, they've been providing lighting to the military. They used to light the shipping lanes for military transports during World War II. They provided lights to the New York Police Department, the New York Fire Department, and first responders all over this country. They're family owned, they're American made. When I was in Afghanistan and Iraq, I was using this Phantom TLS, and it's an awesome light. It's got covert secure white, it's got cyan, it's got infrared, it's got these built-in flash patterns if you need it. In a roundabout way, without this light, there's some people in this world that probably wouldn't be here. So I want to thank Phantom Products again for believing in the show, for sponsoring us, and for the great stuff you guys make. Check out the website. We'll drop it down in the show notes. And again, Phantom Products, thanks for helping us make the donuts.
Or what are you doing on a daily basis? What are you reading? What are you consuming that keeps you ahead of that curve?
One word answer would be everything. And I've always been, this is kind of a nerdy thing to admit, but you know, when I was in publishing for the first part of my career, there were trade magazines, obviously. There were the business, there were business publications. There was Newsweek and Business Week and Fortune and Forbes, and there was Time, and there was, Wall Street Journal, and then there was Advertising Age, Ad Week, Publishing Week, and there were dozens and dozens and dozens, and I would read all of them, and just like stacks like this, and now you do that digitally, of course, and this too is exhausting, by the way, because now it's an endless source of information. So I would say I've now, for me to stay on top of what's happening in my general lane, which is media and marketing and events and brands and, go-to-market strategy and branding and that kind of stuff. It's, I've kind of figured out how to, I guess, narrow it down to maybe a dozen. And it's, that's a combination of things that I follow for free on the internet, on various platforms, and things that I pay digital, subscription fees for. I'm down to one remaining print subscription. And speaking of Tina Brown, it's the New Yorker. It's the only thing I still get delivered in print to my house every week. Everything else is digital.
Well, okay, so let me ask you this then. You meet a young person, maybe one of your daughter's friends, and he or she says, Mr. Gregory, I want to work in publishing. I want to work in, following your footsteps. What advice would you give them then?
Here's the tough part now. What's happened now is, in digital publishing, if you're not one of, 10 or 15 people at the big kids table, and by that I mean, the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal or the Atlantic or the Washington Post, or if you're not one of the big platforms, Meta, Google, YouTube, obviously TikTok, Instagram, all that stuff. If you're not in either of those two groups, you are in this long, long, long tail of digital publishing companies that are struggling more and more and more. And they're struggling because, advertising is increasingly done by machines. It's programmatic. That means that the rates are lower, the CPMs are lower. That means that, and now AI is gonna automate that process. And so the brands and the marketers, each year they allocate less and less to this long of ad dollars I'm talking about now, to this long tail of digital publishers. But there's another thing happening on the editorial side. There is now so much deep fake content out there, and so many of these, deep rabbit holes of echo chambers and social media and the extreme left and the extreme right and the ultra liberals, the Proud Boys, a million other things, that it's becoming harder and harder to make a living on the editorial side of the publishing business. Being a writer, being a journalist. And I was at a conference this week in Washington, D.C. with a new news publisher, News and Politics, called Semaphore. And they, they're backed by some big players, some billionaires. And their focus is on unbiased, truthful, fact-based reporting.
Moderates.
and moderate.
Like me, people who are not really registered to either party, who just want good people to represent them. I mean, you would think that that's really the untapped gold mine that they still haven't found a way to reach yet. You know?
Yes, it is. And so today I have an advisory business, and one of my clients is a news and politics publisher in Washington called The Dispatch. And The Dispatch is center right. So they are not MAGA. They're not, they're not crazy MAGA. And they're not, on the left. They are moderate. They are just very slightly right of center. They're fact-based. They're factual. And they're focusing on the movable middle, which, I could, and after the events of the last couple of months, all of this, flood the zone mayhem that's been happening with the Trump administration. I think that what the Dispatch is doing is really smart, because that's an audience that's underserved right now.
So it's almost like a hearkening back to Walter Cronkite. Here's the news. Do what you want with it.
Yes. That's exactly one of the descriptors they use. It's Walter Cronkite style news where there's a trust factor.
A whole generation doesn't even know who Walter Cronkite is. But for older folks,
that's the challenge of using that marketing. Yeah, it's like nobody under 40 knows who Walter Cronkite was.
But that's what America used to be about, and it's a real shame.
Yeah, I mean, when Walter Cronkite said, "I was a little kid," but I remember it. This will date me. When Walter Cronkite said live, I'm getting goosebumps. John F. Kennedy died 25 minutes ago in Parkland Hospital. He had that very dramatic moment. He took his glasses off, and he had to take a breath. You knew that Kennedy was dead. Like, you could trust him.
Yeah, how do you build that trust? And I think it also, you're talking about influencers, and I'm sure there's great influencers out there, but it's clear what their goal is. And it's that extremely trite cliche, nobody cares about how much you know until they know how much you care. So authenticity is everything. And I'm really disappointed that's become a byword or a catchphrase, because it's not something tangible. But if a young person's trying to get into publishing, is that a skill set they need to be able to identify that, to be able to understand what their generation, this upcoming generation, finds authentic?
Yeah. I think so. Now I'm going to try to answer your question in a more positive way. For young people who are looking to get into publishing of any kind, there's still a vibrant pipeline of people who go to Missouri Journalism School or Columbia Journalism. You don't have to go to those schools, but there's people who they want to be reporters, they want to be writers, they want to be journalists, they want to be storytellers. There's still an art form to that is, part of it is investigative reporting, and that's just old school shoe leather stuff. Like, it's tracking down a story, it's ferreting out a corrupt politician, and staying, or cryptocurrency fraud, or a number of things where diligent investigative journalism is a bedrock of a free society. It's a bedrock of democracy. We need people who can do that well, and there are you can make a good living doing that. And I would say the other part of that is just the ability to tell stories, to tell stories about other human beings that are believable, or relatable, or inspiring. And if you're really good at that, I think you can find a way to succeed by doing that as a profession.
Okay. So now I'm going to get down to the little more mechanics. That's a great answer. I love it. So just telling true stories and searching for truth. I mean, that's what great journalism is to search for truth.
Yes. And the truth is an endangered species more and more every day.
It's not subjective, and you can't be, subjective to be a great journalist. You have to be like a blank slate, almost like a recording tool. Okay, you said this and you said this, without opinions, because people can sniff out opinions. If you're a publisher now and a young person's trying to get into digital media, and they just cold call or send out a letter, or is it more about networking and knowing people, working the smaller jobs, smaller publishers, getting your name out there, getting published, doing the work, and then just using that as a calling card? Because I'm gonna tell you something. I learned something from you. I probably founded a massive charity because of you. I was sitting there at was the movie that we saw? I think it was Lincoln. We were at the premiere.
Yeah, with
Um,
Daniel Day-Lewis,
yeah,
Spielberg.
and Sorkin, and it's great. And you handed me your business card, and I never forget that. I was like, the guy from Newsweek handed me his business card. I told my wife that. I said, "What am I supposed? What could I ever? But I just remembered that, and from that moment on, I always had a business card. So how would a young person network effectively? What do you think is the best, stepping stone pathway for them to reach even an entry level career into publishing?
Now you have these fantastic tools, right? Like when I was starting out, you had a paper resume, and you would put it in the mail in an envelope with a stamp that you would lick yourself, and you would mail 100 of them, and then you would get 0 responses, and you would nail it another 100, and then maybe you get 1 letter back, So now, obviously, you have the internet, and LinkedIn to me is a phenomenal tool.
Boys,
And this is what I tell kids in their 20s is that I think that they may take LinkedIn a little bit for granted because they just grew up like how long has LinkedIn been around? Probably
15 years, maybe.
Yeah, probably 15 years now. I still can't believe what a powerful and a great tool it is, where you can you can not only create a digital resume, but you can build a personal brand. And I know that's a little bit of a cringy thing to say, but I think there's a lot of truth to it. And maybe you don't want to use that.
Hey, man, you go to the grocery store and you're rude to the cashier. Everyone in your town knows about your personal brand.
Yes, exactly. And so LinkedIn and here's the other thing about LinkedIn is it gets better every day because the engineers are doing more with the algorithms, and now they're using this AI technology, and so the ability to build your work persona on LinkedIn and to use it to search for jobs and to build a storyline about content that's important to you, and I don't spend near as much time on it as I do it because I'm in the last third of the third period of the hockey game at this point, most likely, but for people in their 20s and 30s and 40s and in the prime of their career, I think LinkedIn is an amazing networking tool and reputation building tool and job hunting tool. And then who knows what's coming next with all these AI platforms. You can probably type into a prompt into ChatGPT and say, I'm coming out of the military after 10 years and I flew helicopter pilots and I did all this really cool shit and I'd like to enter the private sector, and what are the best choices for me? And you could probably get really interesting answers from that.
It's not on the same level as yourself, but I've helped over 8,000 pilots make the jump into commercial aviation careers. I tell them LinkedIn is basically, and you may not be young enough you may be too young to understand what this means, but LinkedIn is a big fat phone book where everybody is listed.
Yes.
Okay, it really is. And everybody can have a conversation like Facebook about professional things, and yet you can still connect with them. It's invaluable. I'm glad you said that because I really do. I think it's the best tool for that. And I'm shocked a little bit to hear that, but things are changing, right? And you've seen it. Let me ask you one more question. What's the biggest risk you've ever taken?
The biggest risk I took professionally was when I joined at the very early stage, and this was part of this middle chapter of digital and influencer marketing, a startup called Husei. And Husei had, at the time, it was a social media monetization tool for celebrities. It was co-founded by CAA, the talent agency in Hollywood, and this was 2011, 12 in there, or when I joined it might have been 13, but when they first started it was maybe 2011, and it was started as a platform. So if you were Reese Witherspoon or Tom Hanks, and you were a famous celebrity, and you had these new things, like this was pre-Instagram, you had these new platforms like Facebook, you could have a tool that would help you monetize your audiences there and disintermediate the middlemen between you and your fans. And so in other words, you wouldn't need to sit down with a reporter from People magazine and talk to her about your new movie if you're Tom Hanks. And then eventually she's going to write an article and people will pay to read it in People. you can just post it directly through the Husei app, and it'll go automatically onto Facebook and then Instagram and Twitter, and we connected to all the other platforms. But when I joined them, it was a big risk because the company had not been successful in its first incarnation. They had a model, without getting too deep in the weeds, they had a model that was basically to become a digital People magazine, where they would have 50 or 100 million eyeballs and sell ads, and then exit at a very high valuation to a strategic, to another, digital publisher or what have you. And that was not, for a number of reasons, that was not working. That was not working out. So I took a big risk by joining them and with a team figuring out, all right, how do we shift gears and we create essentially an influencer marketing agency that can match the right kind of celebrities, athletes, everyday people, smart people, heroic people with brands, and tell really great, authentic, real stories about brands, not just interruptive ads. And then, build on that and get the brands to get Coke and Pepsi and Chevy and all those folks to, give you an RFP and give you some ad dollars. And we had nothing, we had zero business. And so I took a big risk there. And, and I was not a spring chicken when I joined them. I was, in my 50s. So, when you have college tuition looming and, and all that, a life that you gotta, fund. It was risky, but it worked. It worked out well. I think that was an example of just being a little bit lucky and catching that, that early part of the wave of the creator phenomenon.
What a great decision on whoever's part to use, an iconic talent agency as a springboard for that, because you had access to the talent. That vertical was taken care of. And you really kind of created influencers, and maybe you probably you might be the one to blame for a lot of this influencer stuff because Husei was doing it, and it went on to be purchased too, right?
Yeah. We sold it to Viacom, which is now Paramount.
Right, Paramount Global,
and we had a successful exit to Viacom, and Viacom wanted to have a bigger offering with all the other stuff that they did, and their digital products and their linear TV and their now their movie studio and all that stuff. But it was very smart by CAA to launch it. Like those folks are really bright, and they could see that their talent, their clients, the movie stars and the TV stars and the athletes, they were catching on to this very quickly. Like they could go direct to their fans with these new digital tools, and how do you monetize it, and how do you create best practices for doing it, and how do you bring brands on board for the ride?
And I bet for them that money wasn't as much of an issue as being able to control the messaging.
Exactly. And to have, and to, to be able to, couldn't have said it better. Being able to control the messaging and have a dialogue with their fan base. And it was very interesting in the early days, because when we were first just celebrities, and then we became influencers and athletes and, other people from other walks of life. But when it was first celebrities, it was very binary. Like we used to joke about the Toms. Tom Hanks totally was into it, totally got it, wanted to be on these platforms, wanted to learn.
I've heard such great things about him from people I know who know him.
Yeah, he's awesome. Yeah. Tom Cruise, the other Tom, who's equally legendary guy. I mean, we should all be as cool as Tom Cruise, doing our own stunts.
I'm still working on it.
Hanging on a helicopter run, But Tom Cruise was like the opposite. He was not interested in those days in any of these social platforms or any of this digital persona or this new technology. So it was, it was a very interesting time.
Interesting. Okay, so couple more questions, and then I'll let you go back to living the high life in New York. By the way, when I get to Manhattan sometime, you got to come in the city with me, and I'm taking you to dinner. Okay, agreed?
I'm taking you to dinner.
Going to French Jet.
I've wanted to do that since we met.
If you're listening to French Jet, I've sent more people to you in Tribeca to eat than you can possibly imagine. I should be part owner of that restaurant by now, but I'm bringing Rob, and I want that delicious chicken. I'm going to take him out to dinner. Okay, but seriously, if you could give one piece of advice to anybody who's watching this and saying, I don't know if I have this, I don't know if I could do it. I really want to do it. I want to follow in his footsteps. What would be the one piece of advice you could give somebody?
Persistence, again, no blinding insight there. It's persistence. You gotta pick yourself up off the canvas and dust yourself off, no pun intended, and get back out there. And it's, I think that's the one piece of advice I would have to say. And it's relevant again now, because suddenly you have this very scary economy and this crazy uncertainty and these disruptive technologies. And, that ability to be persistent and courageous, as you can within your own abilities, you got to keep putting your feet on the floor every morning.
Okay. Lastly, you got to tell me about the new thing.
So the new thing is I have a company called Experiential Strategies, and it's a fancy name for an events advisory business. And I'm lucky enough to work with some amazing events. I work with the Aspen Ideas Festival. I work with the New York Comedy Festival.
Club,
I work
yes.
with the Nantucket Project. I work with the Dispatch, as I mentioned, that does events and conferences. I work with a really cool macroeconomic conference called Greenwich Economic Forum right here in Greenwich, where I live and where we raised our daughter. And it's it's great. They're best in class events and festivals, and I get to match them, work with them on some go-to-market strategy and positioning. There are a lot of conferences and events out there, and it's tough to get those sponsorship dollars. And the sponsorship models change. That the brands want experiential. They want really meaningful activations on the ground when they show up at events like this. So I get to be a little bit creative, and I get to tap into a pretty decent Rolodex I built just from being around so long, and work with some pretty cool events and festivals and forums.
It seems like a lot of what you're doing now is kind of a big fat pot of gumbo of everything you've done, especially some of the more altruistic things like you've been a part of. Tell me about, before we get off, tell me about the charity that you worked for.
The one I'm actually most active with right now is I'm a trustee of something. It's a bit of a mouthful. It's called the National Institute of Social Sciences.
Yes. And
it's a 110-year-old organization. It was founded by a mandate of Congress, or I think Teddy Roosevelt administration way back then. The mission of the NISS is to celebrate the contribution in the social sciences. So not medicine and biology and engineering and that stuff, but the social sciences of civic minded people, people who just make a contribution. So actually we can come full circle to Tina Brown. We at our black tie dinner, which we do every year, our gold medal dinner, one of the people we honored a few months ago was David Remnick, who's the editor-in-chief of The New Yorker and was hired by Tina Brown back in the day. And so that's a really good organization, and it's really important to celebrate people who truly make our culture and our society better and recognize those achievements.
Yeah, and you work with SOS Children's Villages USA. That really speaks to my heart, because my wife would have been one of those kids when she was younger. And
was she in foster homes, or?
Yeah, she grew up. She actually signed out of foster homes at 18, mm-hmm. So she never left. So she was on her own her whole life. So to see that you're kind of combining these things, man, isn't that awesome? Isn't it awesome to include and combine stuff that you care about with the stuff that pays the rent? That's success to me.
Yeah, and you get to a certain point in life where you obviously want something meaningful, and you want something that David Brooks, who's one of my favorite writers and was at the Aspen Ideas Festival and the Nantucket Project. I've known him for a long time. He said you reach a certain point in your life and you think less about what's going to be on your resume and more about what's going to be on your tombstone. Not to be morbid. Hopefully that's not anytime soon.
It's going to happen.
But it's going to happen to all of us. And you want look at the funeral this morning for the Pope. It was, not that I'm comparing myself to him.
Yeah, he's a little bit taller.
Yeah, right. Yeah. He's done just a little bit more on the planet than I have, but yeah, you obviously you want something meaningful and you want to give back.
Well, it sounds like if you're looking to get busy with your dash and do something, you need to stay the course. You need to take Rob's advice, and you just need to execute and go do it. Rob, from the bottom of my heart, brother, I really appreciate you coming on the show. It was great to hear this. Unfortunately, folks, there's going to be a lot more content that I'd like to create from this. It's probably going to occur over dinner down in Frenchette in Tribeca on North Moore Street. You want to go there with my good buddy Rob. Rob, I really appreciate it. Thanks for coming on Make the Donuts.
It was my pleasure. Great to be with you, Savvy.
Thanks, brother. Well, if you want to learn more about Rob, you can find him on socials. You can certainly follow his company. But more importantly, you need to go ahead and look at yourself in the mirror and say to yourself, what am I doing and what could I be doing? So if you have a dream, if you have a hope, if you have a career that you want to learn more about, send me a message on socials and let me know. I'll try to find an expert that's good at that job and would be willing to share some advice. Again, thanks for checking us out and Make the Donuts. Make sure you like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.